All right. Hello. Welcome to episode 130 of Decentralized Revolution. Of course, it's a podcast from the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus and Mises PAC. My name is Aaron Harris. I'm your host. I am back from Taiwan. We had a couple of hiccups there, Mike being a new father and me being gone. But we should be back on the regular Monday night tip for a while now. And when I was gone, I woke up one morning and saw all the news about the stuff in Palestine, and I was like, I don't want to have to think about this on my vacation, so I didn't. But when I got back, I went to the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com and got up to speed thanks to Kyle Anzalone and Scott Horton and Dave DeCamp and all those guys. So I thought, hey, there's a lot going on. So Kyle Anzalone, thanks for coming on so you can straighten us all out and tell us what's going on.
Yeah, I hope I could give you the update you're looking for, and thanks so much for having me back on the show. There is a lot going on, but everybody, it is okay to take a couple weeks and enjoy some vacation. It gets heavy, so taking some time to avoid burnout is an important part of advocating for any kind of important political movement.
Well, how do you do it? Because I send out emails for the PAC and do different things, and I have a day job, and so I'm not like hip deep in the absolute worst news of the day every day like you guys are. So what's a typical day like for you, and how do you manage that not avoiding burnout issue?
I guess I just I'm pretty good about once I get into a routine, I'm able to stay in that routine. I got a couple dogs here, some beautiful huskies that are pretty much always around me. And so, just having the goofy dogs to balance out and taking my dogs for a walk and playing with them and stuff like that is pretty good. Having a nice wife who I could talk to or just, have fun with is also, nice distractions. And then, for a typical day, I spend morning. So I live on the East Coast. So I wake up pretty early. I read the news pretty much all morning, opinion articles, really try to get a handle on everything going on and what I need to be prepared for. And then early afternoons, I try to do a little bit of physical movement kind of stuff, yard work, out with the dogs, walking the dogs, maybe a short hike or something like that. And then, about 2 o'clock, I start writing for the day, and I'll just plug away on as many news articles as I could write. Sometimes I'll write as many as 3 or 4, but usually it's 1 or 2.
Yeah. It is one of those things where if you allow yourself to totally get caught up in anything, and especially this, and especially, when the villains are so villainous and the consequences are so, just so horrible. And I haven't even delved into, I've heard you talk about some of the video and the stuff from the Palestine stuff, and just like incredible, just horrible stuff on both ends. And so it's good to realize that life is still there to be lived, and to not go too far into that abyss. So I'm glad there are guys like you and Scott who are doing that. It's almost like you're the ER guys, you see a lot of that trauma. And again, this is nothing compared to what people actually living this stuff are, but I appreciate the work you guys do.
Just to mention, shout out to the real journalists in Palestine, and particularly in Gaza, who, through this utter bombardment that's happening all the time, they are trying to capture and present to the world what's going on, so we have an idea.
Yeah, so I actually have a little bit of a personal story on two of the areas that we were going to talk about tonight. Of course, we want to get to the Ukraine stuff and to the Taiwan stuff, and everybody knows my connection to Taiwan if you've listened to the show, because I love it. But on the Israel thing, so I went to grad school at Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism in 03 and 04. And they have as far as I know, they probably still have it. It's like a global journalism quarter where they pair you with some, news organization somewhere in the world, and you go, work for them for 3 months and get that on your resume. And just about everybody like goes to London and does like economic, Bloomberg and stuff like that. Well, one of my colleagues went to Japan that year, and I went to Israel because I was like, hey, I just want to go, and um, it's really interesting. And this is, of course, so I was there in the spring, summer, early summer, late spring of '04, which, the stuff in Iraq was popping off, and Abu Ghraib was just, that story broke while I was there. And I covered two things over there that really, really affected me. And at the time, I had kind of lapsed from libertarianism back into like a neocon foreign policy stuff viewpoint. I'm ashamed to say. And one of the things that kind of got me back going in the other direction, and I'd never really been really that interested in foreign policy and really read a lot of the libertarian thinkers on the foreign policy, but two experiences. One, again, I was the low man on the totem pole, an intern, so I was sent out to do man on the street stuff. And so when the Abu Ghraib story broke, they told me to go get man on the street stuff in Jerusalem, including in East Jerusalem. So for those who don't know, East Jerusalem is mainly Palestinian. West is mainly Jewish. The old city, which is where you see all the postcard pictures from, is kind of, governed loosely by this council of churches and different things, sort of. And so I went out and I had to ask, Palestinians and Jews about what do they think about these horrendous pictures. And I remember I remember one guy's face in particular. He was an Arab Palestinian, probably in his 60s. And like, I asked him this question and I was as respectful as possible. And he answered my question, but like the look on his face was just like so confused and sad. And like, I could tell that he had very conflicting feelings to be talking to me. And I don't know if he thought I was Jewish, or I'm sure he could tell I was an American. So like that just like affected me, and just, it really bothered me. And the other thing that really bothered me, and I said all that, I'm talking a lot to kind of drive home what was really a very moving experience for me. So at the time, they had, the Israelis had, right before I got there, they had blown up some sheik. I think his name was, I forget the guy's name. I won't even say it because I think I'll get it wrong. But my school didn't want to let me go because with the Iraq stuff and with this attack on, I think it was a Hamas affiliated guy in Gaza, they didn't want me to go. But I went anyway. And then because of that rocket attack, there was some, they had sent some troops into Gaza. I think it was kind of before they kind of completely closed it off and kind of had the policy they've had there the last few years, which you can elaborate on. But a kid got killed. He was a conscript doing his 2 years military service. His name was Lior Vyshinsky, Lior Vyshinsky. And it just so happened that both his mother, his father, and his stepfather were all famous actors in Israel. So not, outside of Israel, nobody knows who they are, but they're apparently very famous inside Israel. And so my editor was like, I want you to go cover this funeral. And I'm like, excuse me, you want me to go do and they said, go ask the parents what they think about this, because the father was very critical of Israeli policy and was just distraught that his son had been killed. And the boy's mother and stepfather were kind of supporting the government. And so I go to this, and I'm from, my family is all from the South. And like, if a newspaper reporter showed up at a funeral in Tennessee or Kentucky, like that wouldn't go well. Right. They said, no, go ahead and go. So I went, and the father did want to talk to the media, and I think he was drunk, understandably so. And he was just incredibly angry and would talk to anybody with a camera. And so I talked to him, and his face was like right in front of mine, and he's pleading with me, like, please tell, we have no business there. My son died for nothing, bloodshot eyes. I can see the guy's face, just vividly right now, just like I could see the Palestinian man's face. And that's always stuck with me. And look, 20 years later, the same, nothing's been solved. The same, I forget, I think it was I forget who was prime minister then. I think it might have been Barack. I know Olmert was the mayor of Jerusalem because I got to meet him. But 20 years later, nothing has really changed. If anything, it's gotten worse. And so, I said all that to say something that Scott says all the time, that in the news media, especially, I think on the mainstream American news media and the sort of conservative news media commentary side, they do that truncating the antecedent thing that Scott talks about all the time. History started 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and Hamas are complete animals, right? And the conversation proceeds from there. And context is important, and nobody is talking about the context of the last 5 years, 20 years, and then on back to before 1948. So I just I get really mad when I hear people saying things like they're saying about Palestinians. I know Justin Amash apparently had a cousin, a child cousin who I believe is a Christian. That's the other thing. Nobody mentions that there are Christians getting killed here too, because they want to make it the Jews versus Muslims thing. So this is like, I know Scott had some family, a family member who was killed. And so this is still happening, and I get so angry about it. And the willful disconnect from, I don't want to know anything about the history because I know Israel is 100% right. And the circles I'm in, it's the people who think Israel is 100% right. And I know there are circles on the other side too. So I know that's a whole lot, but I just know that you guys, when you do your reporting and commentary, you try to keep that context in there. So I don't know where to begin on something like this, but anything I've said there, what does it make you think to say about what's going on right now? Oh, I lost you.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Okay.
what a powerful story you have there. If you have the article, please send it. I'd love to like actually read what you wrote at the time, because that's a really important story, I think, to tell, because it does seem, particularly from the American perspective, that there is a consensus in Israel that this is it. It's gone too far. We've tried to deal with the Palestinians in a humane way, but they've just proved themselves to be dogs. And so we have to now treat them like you would treat a pit bull who disemboweled a child, right? Like, you got to put them down. And so, having any kind of nuance and context to that is important. And just on that point, I'm the opinion editor at antiwar.com. So if you go to that website every day, you see the viewpoints in the spotlight article, and we have run several articles from Israeli media, mainstream Israeli media, including Haaretz, where they are saying, like, look, you cannot look at this in a vacuum. You cannot put 2 million people in what is essentially an open air prison and then not expect something like this to happen. Now, they're not saying we deserved it, Hamas was right, or anything like that. They're just saying that this is a result of Israeli policy. And if we want something like this to not happen again, then, we need to go a different route in how we treat the Palestinians. And so, even though it seems like, I guess, a little bit different this time. Typically, I would say it seems like there's a full consensus in the American media that they're only going to present the Israeli narrative, but that does seem to have shifted a little this time around. And there are some meaningful coverage of the Palestinian perspective on things. I was just driving around, and there was a Palestinian journalist who was really laying into the NPR interviewer, explaining that what's going on in Gaza in particular, that's an open air prison, that Israel is looking to carry out this long-term ethnic cleansing campaign, and that the power rests in Tel Aviv, and therefore a lot of the responsibility for what's happening rests in the hands of the Israeli government. And so I guess before we talk about this, right, it's important to, especially from the perspective of a libertarian, one, I care about what my government is doing.
Yep.
Hamas is bad, but sitting here for an hour and talking about how awful Hamas is achieves nothing. And in fact, it kind of works against the goals that we have as libertarians, right? Because if we just talk about how bad Hamas is, then people are going to draw the conclusion that, oh, the American government has to do something about Hamas. And so, Daniel McAdams likes to point this out, where you should never do the work of the deep state for them. And I think that's very important. So I'll go ahead and say now, what Hamas did on October 7th and any kind of killing of Israeli civilians by Hamas was absolutely terrible. However, our government gives Israel about $4 billion every year in security assistance, right? And so the crimes that are committed by the Israeli military are being committed with my tax dollars. The US, now I'm not a big fan of international government and the UN, but the UN is the current platform for, countries to try to look to resolve grievances and, atrocities that are happening against a particular population. And the US works very, very hard at the UN to prevent Israel from receiving any kind of international accountability, including, during the Trump administration, they went as far as to sanction the International Criminal Court for investigating Israel. Not that I'm supportive of the International Criminal Court, but if that court is investigating a third country, it's none of America's business whatsoever, particularly Washington. And so, I really focus on the actions of the Israelis, because what they are doing with, the US's government's backing, and they're doing with my tax dollars. And then, just the other thing, when we're talking about these groups, when we're talking about Hamas, we're talking about a limited number of Palestinians. When we're talking about the Israeli government, we're talking about a small number of the Israeli people. Now, there are Israeli people who support their government and, openly advocate for their government committing atrocities. And there are Palestinians who do the same. And in both cases, that's wrong. However, when we're talking about Israel doing something wrong or Hamas doing something wrong on this podcast, we're not talking about Jews. We're not talking about Muslims. We're not talking about Arabs. We're talking about, the particular power centers, the governments and the militaries that actually, and the militias, from the Palestinian side that actually kill innocent people.
So let me you answered a lot of my next questions there, but specifically zone in on what Hamas is and how that differs from the different paramilitary things and the Palestinian people, and talk about the relationship between the Israeli government and Hamas and the other factions among the parties and stuff like that among the Palestinians, both in Gaza and the West Bank. Set that context.
Yeah. So Hamas, answering what Hamas is, there's a lot of complications and nuance to it, because since 2007, Hamas has essentially been the government of the Gaza Strip, right? And so there's a lot of people who work for Hamas who have civilian jobs, who, so compared to somebody who works for like the US government, right? Somebody who's a trash collector in Washington, D.C. or something like that. They do work for the federal government, but when you're talking about the US government, you're not talking about those people. So, when we're talking about Hamas, I think particularly in the context of this show, we're talking about like their armed wing, not because they do have like civilian leadership, political leadership of that group. So we're talking about, the armed wing, and they are a militia. They say they're, I think, 40,000 strong. I would assume that's an overstatement, that's some Hamas propaganda. But who knows now how many people under the relentless Israeli bombing campaign over the past 3 weeks have just gone and said, my family is now gone. I'm a young man. What are you going to do? You're just going to become a refugee in Egypt, or are you going to stay and fight? I could see some people joining up for Hamas and their ranks being bolstered for that region. But, they have tens of thousands of fighters. They have low quality rockets and some other pretty rudimentary military equipment. If people look at what happened on October 7th, they used parasails, paragliders, something like that, powered by fans to fly over the wall, the border fence of their prison. And from there, they carried out what seemed to be relatively indiscriminate attacks. From my understanding, the music festival where it seems the maybe the worst atrocities occurred by Hamas. From my understanding, that was moved 1 or 2 days before the attack happened. My guess is this attack was planned long before 1 or 2 days ahead, just based on the amount of coordination that Hamas needed to do, and it probably had to almost all be done without cell phones and things like that.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? So this is a long term planned attack, is my assumption here, and so maybe they didn't intend to land there, but they landed this rave that's going on. Also, the attack happened, I think, at like 6 a.m. Israeli time. So I don't know why they would assume that, that the rave would have still been going on, or if they wanted to attack you assume they go earlier, maybe. And I think Hamas has said that they were attempting to hit a nearby military base. No idea if that's true or not. And at the same, so the extent of their military equipment and capabilities are unguided rockets, motorbikes. They do have some drones, which they could apparently drop munitions from that could tank out Israeli tanks. So that is a fairly sophisticated piece of military equipment. And you should also mention that there is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad um in Gaza that also operates. And I don't want to say it operates, you know, against Hamas, but they're different organizations, and so that they do different things. And apparently, some of the raids that occurred, either with or without coordination, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, the kind put forward that they took advantage of the Hamas attack to also send some of their fighters outside of the Gaza Strip, and so when you look at Hamas, it's this militant organization, and on October 7th, they certainly carried out where in certain aspects, a terrorist attack, right? They hit civilian targets. Some of the people who are, will put forward a narrative where they tried to kidnap people. They really weren't looking to kill a whole lot of Israeli civilians. Now, there does seem to be some attacks that were directed at civilians. There's people driving cars that were shot. Children were killed this way. Children were killed inside their homes. And seemingly definitely by Hamas. I don't know if anybody's really putting up an argument that like Israeli did this part. Now, there's a really important article by Matt Blumenthal today at the Gray Zone where he goes through and looks at and from testimony from Israeli survivors and military sources where they say that they indiscriminately fired on what were Hamas and Israeli civilians. And so some of the number that the Israeli government puts out is 1,400. They've, I think, published about 700 names. About 300 of those are military. So 400 civilians for sure, as many as 1,000 civilians, Israeli civilians killed. Some number of those do seem to have been killed either in the crossfire or directly by the Israeli military, but certainly Hamas is responsible for a lot of those as well. And they have taken anywhere between 200, 250, maybe 300 Israeli captives. It's really hard to get good numbers on it. There's reports that up to 50 of them have been killed in Israeli airstrikes in the Gaza Strip, but I haven't seen any confirmation of that. They've released at least 5, I think quite a few more prisoners at this point, and Israel's refusing to negotiate on prisoner relief. And in Matz's article, he kind of puts forward the narrative that the Hamas attack was directed at taking Israeli captives in order to trade them for Palestinian prisoners. There's about 10,000 Palestinian prisoners. Some of them are guilty of violent crimes, and even in a libertarian society, we would do something about these people. But huge numbers are political prisoners or, kids that are in jail for throwing stones. And if you read about, the way the Israeli courts work, we're talking about they go into a child's bedroom in the middle of the night, snatch a kid out of bed, 7, 8, 9, teenage kid. They stick them in a military courtroom with a couple of armed military police. A lawyer walks in, pushes a document in front of them that's not in a language that they even read. It's going to be in Hebrew. Maybe they get to go and sit in front of an Israeli military court, but unlikely, they're just going to sign this confession and go to prison for a couple of years for, throwing rocks or something, or being accused of throwing rocks, I should say, because it's not like they even really get a fair trial of any kind. And so, there's people who are pointing out that Hamas carried out this attack to try to free the Palestinian prisoners in a swap. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but even the Israeli government is kind of, I think, reacting to it as if it is, because they're completely refusing any prisoner negotiations. They basically say release everyone, and then we could talk about other things. But
Yeah.
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 Oh, wait,
Go
can I
ahead.
say one more thing?
Yeah.
So for people who want to know the history of Hamas, because this is really important, and there's a lot of details in here that I can't recite off the top of my head, but there has been a policy in Israel for a couple decades now, and really, particularly since like 2007, when Hamas ends up controlling the Gaza Strip, where the Israeli government is fine with Hamas, because they see Hamas as, and Hamas is a militant group that has done some atrocious things. And so they're able to say, well, if Hamas is in charge of the Palestinians, then there's nobody for us to negotiate with, because how could you negotiate with Hamas? It would be like, I think it's a part of the reason why the Bush administration said that Osama bin Laden was in cahoots with Saddam Hussein, because how can you be expected to negotiate with Saddam Hussein if he just directed our towers getting knocked down, right? This guy's
Yeah.
a terrorist. And so, they really like to use Hamas for that, to say, oh, we can't negotiate with the Palestinians because you have Hamas here. And so there's a fantastic article. It's by Connor Freeman and Scott Horton. Connor's the co-host of my show, Conflicts of Interest. He's one of our editors at the Institute. And of course, Scott Horton, everybody knows. And they go through and they detail point by point, what Hamas is, what it's done, and what the Israeli government has done, and why Netanyahu has helped to keep Hamas in power in Gaza and allow this to fester.
Yeah. So what has I guess what's the end game for both sides here? So like, well, first let me say this. So like, I'm a Christian, I'm a pacifist, I'm an anarchist. So like, I'm not for any of the violence. And yeah, 100% clear on that. Sometimes when people try to explain why something happened, it's taken, I think people on one side or the other will say, oh, you're trying to make excuses. But like, that's why I'm a pacifist and an anarchist, because like, if you use violence to get what you want, you're going to create ill will and just this cycle that spirals downwards. So like, we've been cycling on this for a long, long time now. And yeah, so as always, the innocent people on either side get literally caught in the crossfire on this. So I look at it. So when my normie friends ask me about a political issue, usually the first thing I say is, always remember it's quite possible that both parties, whether they be political parties or like Russia, Ukraine, that both parties to the argument or the debate or the controversy, it's quite possible that they're both wrong, right? And so I take that approach to all this stuff. And of course, like Scott says, blame is not quantifiable. There's plenty of blame and stuff to go around. So what we have on either side is a bunch of gangsters who run the Jewish Israeli government, a bunch of gangsters who run Hamas, and all the other Hezbollah and all the other groups that we're talking about. And so they are criminal organizations doing criminal things. So and they have motivations, right? They want to stay in power, keep power, expand power. So why would Hamas do this? But maybe first, before we get to why Hamas did this horrible thing, what has been the Israeli government's overarching strategy toward dealing with what they see as a Palestinian problem for the last generation or so?
Yeah, so in particular, the policy with Gaza has been to corral the 2.3 million people that live there. And by the way, of those 2.3 million, about 1 million, 50% are under the age of 18, so children, and about 80% are refugees from other areas of, what they consider Palestine, right? The rest of Israel. And so, the conditions in Gaza are not great. The UN had long estimated the Gaza Strip would be unlivable by 2020, and fortunately, it hasn't quite hit that level of desperation, but it's been pretty close. So, this is a little segment about 144 square miles, 140 square miles located on the Eastern Mediterranean Sea. It does share a southern border with Israel, or not Israel, Egypt, but Cairo is firmly in the pocket of Washington and Tel Aviv. And so, and Israel is the overarching military power. So, as we've seen, even when Egypt has wanted to bring aid into Gaza over the past 3 weeks, Israel has bombed that border crossing. And so, a lot of people think they make a really good point where they say, well, why doesn't Egypt just let all the Palestinians in? As if that's, what the Palestinians want or what the Egyptians want. They just assume that because I guess the Palestinians are Muslims, that they're just as likely Egyptians as they are Palestinians. Like there's no difference between the two. So why don't they just go live there? But Egypt, I think, is firmly in the pocket of Tel Aviv and Washington, and so there is that border crossing. But then Israel controls the other border crossing. They also control the coastline, and so oftentimes over the past 15 years or so, the fishermen of Palestine, of Gaza, have only been able to travel a few kilometers off the coast, never to get out to the deep water to catch any really valuable or deep fish. Then you have the Israeli government intentionally limiting the number of calories that the Gazans have. They've called it, they put the Palestinians on a diet. They don't want them to starve because that would cause, an international crisis. They don't want it to look like Somalia or Ethiopia, where, then celebrities are like, why are these children looking like this, and really start to go. But they also don't want the Palestinians to have a chance to thrive. There's like 50 or 60% unemployment in Gaza prior to all of this. And, the situation has gotten so bad that in 2018, the people of Gaza essentially put their hands in the air and marched towards the wall of the Gaza prison, and the Israeli snipers gunned them down, including paraplegics, people without legs sitting in a wheelchair, children as young as 13-year-olds shot by Israeli snipers, medics and journalists shot in the back.
Yeah.
Women, just so
I want to explain what that was. So there was a name for that, and it was they said they were going to do it, and they said it was a peaceful thing, right? So you said they marched toward the wall, but they were
it was
unarmed
called
civilians.
the Great March of Return. Yeah,
right. So it wasn't a spontaneous militia uprising. It was a MLK Gandhi type thing, and they were shot for their troubles, right? I mean,
yeah, far more peaceful than a lot what was happening in a lot of American cities in 2020, as what was going on.
Yeah.
They were throwing like the tear gas canisters back as the Israelis. They were throwing rocks at the border wall. They did roll some flaming tires towards the border wall, but in fairness, that was to obstruct the vision of the Israeli sniper. So I would say was non-violent, essentially in every way. I guess attacking the wall of your prison could be violated, a violence if you're the prison guard, but these people don't belong in prison. It's the problem.
So what's so this has been the policy for a long time, isolating Gaza, severely restricting what goes in and out. So when I was in Israel, I was allowed to go to, being a Christian, I wanted to go to Bethlehem and Nazareth on my day off, and I did that on 2 separate occasions. I went to Ramallah and walked around a little bit. So you could go to the West Bank. You could not go to Gaza then, partly because of the conflict that was going on then. But Gaza has been, to my understanding, for a long time, much more closed off than the West Bank. But so. Okay, we're going to turn this into an open air prison, and then what? So what is their ultimate, do they have a stated goal for why they're doing this? Do they just want to hope are they actually is it a slow motion genocide? Is it until we get somebody we can, what's their stated goal, and what's is there an analysis of what they're actually trying to accomplish? And even talk about before this latest attack, because that I want to set the stage for what Hamas was thinking. In other words, why they thought this was a good strategic move. and that would have been dictated by what they perceived the Israeli long-term goal with Gaza to be.
Yeah, so there's kind of three different classes of Palestinians. There's about 20% of the population of Israel, the areas that aren't the West Bank or the Gaza Strip or the Golan Heights, are Palestinians. So they're Arab Israelis, and they live essentially as second or third class citizens. And then you have the people of the West Bank, and when you hear that Israel is an apartheid state, this is really the group of people they're talking about. They're especially now, the Palestinians kind of are all segregated in all their little Bantu stands. The Israelis have put settlers between the Palestinian towns and have taken over Palestinian towns. They have settler only roads. The Palestinians had to go through checkpoints. And so when you see that little like B or figure eight shape in the east of Israel, it's really not a continuous state anymore. It's like a reverse Swiss cheese or something like that. You have a little isolated Palestinian communities at this point. And Israel regularly carries out raids in this area. A couple of years ago, one of the most renowned Palestinian journalists, Shireen Abu Akleh, was gunned down while wearing a press vest. An Israeli sniper shot her in the neck. And, Israel said, oh, we didn't do it. It was the Palestinians. And then all these human rights groups and the CNN, the Washington Post were like, well, there weren't any Palestinian militants there. And then Israelis are like, well, it was us, but she was asking for it. And so that's the end of that story. So the people of the West Bank essentially live in these apartheid conditions, and now the people of Gaza, it's different. They're in like this isolated prison camp, right, where Israel controls everything, including if you're a 6-year-old girl in Gaza and say you have some kind of horrific cancer that they can't treat at the Gaza City hospital, and so they have to send you to the West Bank or to East Jerusalem, where they have, or abroad to Turkey or Jordan or something like that, to where you could get medical treatment. Well, the Israelis may let you go, but good luck getting an adult that you're related to get approval to travel outside of Gaza. And think about that. Like if you're a parent, you have to send your 6-year-old who has some kind of near terminal cancer with almost a complete stranger to go get medical treatment. Just this is the level of isolation and oppression that the people of Gaza face. And so in the wake of the Israeli bombing campaign, you've seen people of Gaza marching through the streets saying, they would rather be killed by an Israeli airstrike in their neighborhood to die on their feet rather than evacuate and move to Egypt and die on their knees, where they're, just going to rot in a refugee camp where nobody cares about them. So, the situation for the people of Gaza is truly, truly horrific. And now, look, Aaron, I don't think that the Israeli government would prefer all the Palestinians to die, right? Like, I don't think that they, wake up every morning thinking, oh, we want to kill Palestinians or something like that. But if they were all gone tomorrow, it would solve an awful lot of problems for the Israeli government. And that's the way they look at it. And so I think really up until October 7th, it would have been more appropriate to describe it as like an ethnic cleansing campaign, where basically they want to make the Gaza Strip so unlivable for the Palestinians that live there. They voluntarily leave and go live in a refugee camp somewhere in Egyptian territory, and then become Egyptians and give up their complete claim to the Gaza Strip, and then Israel could have it. Now, since October 7th, I think, you're getting to the point where you could start to think about using the genocide word to describe what Israel is doing here, where, it's not just that they want you gone. They're willing to actively wake up in the morning and kill you to do it. And by the way, there's a lot of Israeli government officials just absolutely celebrating the murder of the Palestinian people in Gaza.
Yeah, there's different. My understanding is it's a parliamentary democracy, and so therefore different people in the coalition are of differing, subgroups and all that. And Netanyahu's government has people who are even more right wing than he is. Correct?
Oh yeah. There's a particular minister, Ben Gavir, who actually has a lot more power and influence in the West Bank than in Gaza. But this man is a violent racist who there's a rabbi, it's Kane, but I think it's pronounced a little bit differently, Kane. And he was actually, deemed a terrorist by the Israeli government for what he did and wasn't allowed to be in Israeli politics. And Ben Gavir worships him, and that's kind of his outlet for what is the Israeli state should be, which is a militant Jewish state. Deemed at building the best world possible for the Jews and at the
Yeah.
expense of the others.
Yeah, I think you're talking about it's. I looked it up and I was right. Meir Kahan.
Yes.
Yeah, it's like like a super radical Zionist party. I think that guy was like from Brooklyn or something, but oddly enough,
I believe that he was killed somewhere in New York City.
yeah, I remember talking to I'm going to have Sheldon Richmond back on at some point, but here's Sheldon's book, Coming to Palestine. Sheldon talked a little bit about that guy. I agree. I mean, it seems like, I don't know, something's happened too over my lifetime and I don't know, I think it's really been since World War II that the American government has kind of set this tone of like, we just don't negotiate with anybody. Like, I think Kissinger, I guess they did negotiate an end to the Vietnam War because they lost, right? But like every other time, like when's the last time you heard an American president say we need to sit down, either, something we're a party to or somebody that other people are a party to? We just don't negotiate. I mean, I guess the Camp David thing with Carter, and then the stuff with Clinton and Rabin and Arafat, and those were kind of anomalies, I think, in my lifetime of like an American president actually wanting to get peace. And obviously, neither of those things worked. And I've heard different people on both sides of this say that both the Camp David thing and the Oslo Accords were both, there was bad faith on both sides. So like, I guess we could talk all night about this, but like, what's the outcome from here? Is there ever going to be any sort of like talks over this, or is this gonna just, is Israel gonna do the ground invasion, or what do you see? What do you see happening?
Well, I think you make a really important point there, and I think it will kind of answer the question in part, which is there was once a point where diplomacy and negotiation was something that happened generally in the United States. And I mean, the Bush administration, not really, but, Barack Obama ran on a policy of getting along better with Russia. They were supposed to have the Russian reset and restore the relationship that Bush blew up. Donald Trump was, ruthlessly attacked for, say, wanting to negotiate with anyone. And so I think it's, really been since the Donald Trump administration that we've shifted from, Obama did get blown up for doing the JCPOA by the Iran nuclear deal by the Republicans.
Yeah.
But
The one good thing he did is the one thing that the Republicans harp on the most. Yeah.
But he did get that done, right? And
Yeah.
there was, I guess, enough support to get it done, where today you can't back down from anything anywhere or you're capitulating to evil, right? I mean, this is absurd to the point where, we have sanctions starving Syrians and Afghans to death all the time, right? Like constantly just destroying these countries, and intentionally so, making sure they can't rebuild from decades or a decade-long war in that country. And you can never back down and negotiate with anyone. If we negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine, that's capitulating to Putin. If you negotiate anywhere, it's phrased as capitulation. And so that means you have to have utter dominance over everyone. But that's the most childish and stupid way to look at the world and the globe ever, that you can't go around the world and say, you know what? Russia's a very powerful and important state in Asia. And so, you know what? We're not going to try to admit Ukraine into NATO. And Russia does get to draw some red lines. And guess what? there's just not a lot of American interest in the Middle East. And so Bashar al-Assad in Syria, he's a bad guy. The Taliban, they're not good people. But guess what? We're not going to try to end their regime or demand the Afghan or Syrian people overthrow their governments. We're just going to let them do what the Afghans and Syrians are going to do. And it better if those people are free, right? Like that, from my perspective, if the Afghan women had more rights, that would be fantastic. But there's nothing I could do as a white man in America to possibly make that happen. And obviously, they've tried for 20 years to send our bombers over there to achieve that mission. They absolutely can't. And so, at some point you have to admit that diplomacy and negotiations are the way to move forward, and they just can't. And so I'm worried here that the Biden administration has set the standard that Israel, we got your back, do what you want, gloves off. And how are they going to walk back from that now?
Yeah.
And I think that's really the problem. If the Biden administration doesn't say no to Israel, then Israel, and they keep feeding them weapons, then Israel is going to keep using them on the Palestinians. And so, there are things that can get so horrific. We had the Baptist hospital bombing, which still completely unclear what happened there. A few hundred people are dead. That seems pretty certain. And I think it's likely an Israeli attack. All the evidence that the Israelis put out that apparently indicted the Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad for that has been debunked. And so I think we're back at looking at that being an Israeli attack. And so horrors like that could maybe drive some momentum the other way. I just don't see it happening. The White House is just so deaf to any other kind of communication or reason, and they've decided that we're going all in on this, and that's what they're going to do. And look at the juveniles and fools that we have actually probably in charge of U.S. foreign policy. I mean, Joe Biden is a avowed Zionist and says the relationship between the U.S. and Israel is bone deep. Antony Blinken said, as long as America is around, it's going to support Israel. Now, what I mean? Assuming that Israel is going to outlive your own country. And with other people in the administration like Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, you just don't see anyone really saying like, boss, this is, we just can't support this anymore. This is too ugly. Because these are all the people that chose to have the war in Ukraine, who looked at a Russian offer to negotiate and not have that war and sent it back to Vladimir Putin and said, nope.
Yep. No, I agree. I mean, to me, it goes back to, if you really want to be disgusted, anybody out there, just Google Antony Blinken and see what he's said about all this. And it's just pretty shocking, his general stance on this. And so I think the best we can hope for, sadly, is a return to the way things were on October 6th, right? Like, I don't see this thing. I don't even want to, we could get more depressed all night, but so let's pivot to Asia. And
can I just say, I don't think that could happen.
Okay.
And
well, I don't think it could either, but I think that's the best thing that could happen. That's why I'm so pessimistic.
Oh no, I think we're past that at this point. I think Israel has done too much damage to the infrastructure in Gaza, where to go back to October 6th, Gaza has to be able to support 2.3 million lives. And at this point, with the destruction Israel's done to it, it probably can't, and is probably not, able to for years in the future. And so that means something has to give, right? And I do think that, as well as capturing hostages, as well as, provoking an Israeli response, I think that the goal of Hamas was to break the status quo, because they basically every single day the Palestinians were losing. They were losing a little bit more and a little bit more, and nobody cared. And so I think they basically just felt like they had to change things, because the U.S. was about to, I think, getting close to signing a deal with the Saudis to basically promise Saudi Arabia a security guarantee and give them a nuclear program in exchange for the Saudis normalizing relations with Israel without raising the Palestinian issue. And so they felt like they were losing all their backers, all their supporters, and that, life every day is just getting a little bit worse. The Israeli government is getting a little bit more radical, and they're, getting and by the way, the day before this happened, the Israeli government made it so that males under the age of 60 couldn't go pray at the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. And so, just the insults and the degradation of Palestinian culture, that slow erosion of what it, is Palestine, was going to be eliminated. And so I guess, from the Hamas side, they felt like they needed to change something. And look, they probably killed any normalization agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia now, because the Saudis can't let the Iranians be that much bigger of backers than the Palestinians than them.
Yeah.
And so this is really going to change things, and we could be looking at a Middle East wide war by the end of the year. And so there's so many dominoes that could fall in so many different directions this could go, but I don't see anything that would allow a return to the status quo of even being possible at this point, even under the best, most favorable conditions.
Right. And that was my point of like, I think that would be even unlikely, but like some sort of peace talks or anything like that is like literally impossible without like, I mean, it would take like a catastrophic war or something like that where we're literally picking up the pieces to, I can't even imagine what scenario would be where an American president would be like, hey guys, let's sit down and talk. Right. Like, I just don't see that happening. And the reason why, ultimately, it goes back to, Eisenhower's military industrial complex, that I think these guys just simply don't care as long as the share price for Northrop Grumman and, Boeing and whatever. Like, I think it's that simple, right? Like, and it's, I don't see any other way to explain the Russia thing and the Taiwan thing. And I think it's as simple as that. And until people wake up and, realize that, and I don't know how we get to that point without something really truly horrible happening. But I use the phrase pivot to Asia because it's kind of like Scott uses that a lot, that what somebody in the Obama administration was like, hey, we got to get ready to rule the Pacific or whatever. So like, give us like maybe a short thing on China, Taiwan, and Russia, Ukraine here in the next, however much longer you got here. Just kind of a summary on where we are on those places.
Yeah, let's start with the money. So, by the way, there's a great article today at Responsible Statecraft by Eli Clifton, where he explains how it's going to be a major boon for the arms manufacturers, the war in Israel, and they're already starting to say it. And so, the war state, all these wars are getting tied together, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about the new axis of evil. We have the new House Speaker, Mike Johnson, saying, I just wrote this for antiwar.com over the weekend. Mike Johnson says Russia, China, and Iran are the new axis of evil. And we have Joe Biden putting together a massive aid package. We're going to have $61.4 billion for Ukraine. That's $14 billion for Israel. Some billion, at least $2 billion for the Asia Pacific military buildup, and then $14 billion for border security. And so this is all being packaged into one big war that we have to fight against all the bad people. And so in the Middle East, that's the Palestinians, the Iranians, Hezbollah, Assad, the Shia militias of Iraq, and the Houthis in Yemen. In Europe, that's the Russians, and then in Asia, it's North Korea and China. And they're really, I guess, preparing to fight all these wars at the same time. The military commander of the U.S. forces in the Indo-Pacific recently said that, yes, we're fighting a war in Ukraine. Yes, we're fighting a war in Israel. But guess what? We're going to also be able to fight the war against China, too, if we have to do that. And so yeah, all of this is one giant military buildup, and it's really in a crazy way being packaged in this massive World War III bill where they want to pass again $105 billion in one single bill to fund all these wars. Hey, Aaron, did I lose you?
Yeah, something's wrong with my camera, but I'm here. So until I fix the camera, we're just gonna have to see the little dot there. Specifically, yeah, that's pretty shocking that he would say something like that in regard to the old axis of evil chestnut.
Right.
That off. I'm 47 years old. I don't think they would get to me in the draft pretty soon, but you may be in trouble. I don't know. I mean, it's just how truly crazy are these people? But like, I heard something recently on the some poll or something that like your average man on the street in Ukraine is getting tired of this stuff. Like, is that? Do you see any chance that that could go to the negotiating table anytime soon, or will the West not let Ukraine do that?
Yeah, I don't see it happening before the 2024 election. The Biden administration plan is to fund the war at least through then. So I don't see them letting Zelensky go to the table now. There are analysts who, and some of them have been predicting this for months, and so I'm not sure how accurate it is that there may be some limit on how long Ukraine is able to fight this war. It's simply the West could run out of artillery shells, they could run out of men, and that would cause this war to come to a halt based on just a collapse of the Ukrainian, or maybe they start to read the tea leaves and they see that, hey, we just don't have the forces for this anymore, and so then they allow Kiev to negotiate. But I think the Biden administration, the White House, is at least going to feel like his reelection and the election of Kamala Harris or Gavin Newsom or whoever is kind of dependent on this war still be going on and being able to present it as a conflict, a good against evil, that America must win and that we are winning. And so I don't see that happening. But you're right about the polling. And this, by the way, has happened in spite of the fact that Zelensky has nationalized the media. And so it's not that people could, read dissenting opinions or anything like that, even about the war in Ukraine. And they've rounded up war dissenters. Early in the war, AP was going around with military police of Ukraine and filming them arrest people who posted things that the Ukrainian government deemed Russian propaganda. And so even with that level of narrative control, the Ukrainian people are getting tired of fighting for this. And so I would love to see tomorrow the Ukrainian people rise up. They tell Zelensky no more, go to the table and negotiate. And Vladimir Putin is a responsible, mature enough man to realize that he can't take advantage of the situation too bad, or it'll create an untenable peace, and to sign a peace that is something that can set Europe up on a path away from deconfrontation, and eventually that to actually go to de-escalation and then a return to diplomacy. It's going to take time. A
Yeah.
lot of things have to be unwound. A lot of stupid things have been said by people in the American government, and those people need to retire and be less important, and to get all these deep state actors out. It is going to take time, but we can start to move in that direction once this war is over, and I hope it happens. The China war stuff is really bad, Aaron. That's all I could tell you.
Well, let
In the
me
amount of time
let,
we have, but
yeah, we got a
it'll
few
build
more
up.
minutes. Let me just tell you. So I was over in Taiwan for the first couple weeks of October. My wife's family, my mother-in-law is over there, and her big extended family. We had a great time. I ate stinky tofu and all kinds of great, new ramen and all the other, beef noodle soup and all that great stuff. Went to a Taiwanese baseball game, and it's a great place to be. I love it. I want, to retire there someday. I don't know if Xi Jinping is going to allow that to happen, but uh, over there, people don't seem too worried about it. I got the impression that it wasn't like a strictly taboo thing to ask people about, but one of my wife's cousins, who's kind of our age, gave us kind of the rundown. Um, people, I get the impression, and tell me I'm wrong, or fill me in, but like I get the impression that there's a lot of money being made. There's trade between China and Taiwan. There's lots of cultural ties and stuff like that, and it is really complicated. But when I look around, like when's the last time China like actually invaded somebody? Like to me, I think they do more there. They rob you with a fountain pen rather than the gun, to quote an old folk song. But my impression is that there's not going to be a war unless the United States really screws something up. Am I even close on that in your opinion?
So I think if we look at just China versus Taiwan, I think you're probably right that it's unlikely that China would invade, and they would just look to exact small concessions that, incrementally add up and eventually have Taiwan act as least as like a Hong Kong, pre 2020 type situation, right? Um, I think that's the way Beijing would like to do it. I see the problem is that, from China's perspective, Taiwan is this one island, but it's surrounded by so much other US militarism. And so if we look at, the American military buildup in Japan, and also they're really working hard to get Japan and South Korea to resolve all their World War II grievances, and then to, have these two countries essentially establish an alliance. And honestly, when I talk about Asia, as much as I'm talking about China, I think North Korea is a very possible flashpoint as well. And it's kind of hard to see how America could fight a war against North Korea and not upset Beijing to the point where they enter that war as well, just with the amount of American military assets and bombing and missions that are going to be going on right along the Chinese border and in the Chinese sphere of influence. I think that's probably going to be pretty an untenable situation for Beijing. But if you look at the American military buildup in the Asia Pacific overall, it's just massive. They've made deals with all these small island nations in the Pacific, and are now essentially saying that we've drawn a big circle around all these countries, and we could say that China has to stay out of this massive section of the Pacific Ocean. But by the way, we're going to sail our warships through the Taiwan Strait because China has no right whatsoever to declare that as its own. They've really made a lot of these threats involving the Philippines as well. There's these shoals out in the South China Sea, and they probably are, some of them are probably closer to the Philippines, but the US is saying that, we're going to defend Philippines territorial rights to this shoal if that means war with Beijing. And so, overfishing in the South China Sea, the US is willing to go to war with Beijing, is what they're saying. They're putting military nuclear submarines in Australia. This is a major provocation towards Beijing. And also, all the freedom of navigation operations, all the flights over the South China Sea. Now, I will say, I don't think China is going to, even if we end up with a provocation in the next few years, I don't think it's necessarily going to be a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. I think they would definitely try and probably find some success using a blockade to either exact concessions from Washington or Taipei in order to, from their perspective, start to rebalance the situation in the Pacific. I think a blockade would be much more monetarily effective for the Chinese. Imagine the amount of resources China would have to commit to, sending just all these men across this 80-mile stretch of water, the Taiwan Strait. And Taiwan does have an advanced military. I think it's a far more I don't want to say competent society, but Ukraine's a very corrupt state, and
Yeah.
has been since it became an independent state, where Taiwan is a manufacturing powerhouse. They have some pretty advanced submarines that they've domestically built that have think like 2,000 foot depth range. And so, these are 2,000 meter, I believe is how it's measured, depth range. So these are some pretty sophisticated subs, and they have F-16s, and just a far more competent government than ever existed in Ukraine. And so I think China would probably understands that, and would probably take the blockade route should they feel that kind of escalation was necessary. Now, if Washington starts blowing up the Chinese ships, then we're talking about war and probably a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. But maybe at that point, cooler heads would prevail, and they would work out some kind of diplomatic negotiation. But I think when you look at China, wouldn't necessarily invade Taiwan to take Taiwan back, but if it's becoming a massive American aircraft carrier off the coast of China, and they have all these other military assets in the region carrying out all these other provocations, Taiwan is probably the place that Beijing is best able to push back against America, strike a real blow, and maybe force the Americans to negotiate.
Yeah, it is one of those things where you said you used the phrase cooler heads prevail, and I don't see them. And again, I really think that people are just motivated by power and money, and they really don't care what they are willing to risk the absolute worst. And so I think that it's, whoever's actually running things for Biden, we're all at their mercy for the next few months. And then it seems like if you'd have told me 10 years ago that I'd be secretly hoping that, that Donald Trump would maybe get reelected and that things might be a little bit better with him, like I'd have told you were crazy. And I don't even know if I believe that now, but is there, I know you got nothing to go on here, but what do you think a Trump second term foreign policy would be like? My gut is that the deep state would just double down and do Russiagate, or worse. They might go for something more, final, shall we say? But maybe I'm wrong. Where are we going to be here 3 or 4 years from now, do you think?
Oh, sometimes it depends on the week, right?
Yeah.
Because the Republicans really aren't as bad as the Democrats on the war in Ukraine. And so if we were talking about a month ago, Trump looks far more appealing. I wouldn't vote for him, but at least you could look at Trump and say he might end the war in Ukraine. And again, not enough to vote for him or support him or anything like that, but that is something that could happen under Trump that wouldn't happen under Biden. However, the Republicans are far more supportive of both the wars against China and Israel. And so
no, the war for Israel, not the war against Israel.
Right. Yeah. The war for Israel, the war against China. And so I mean, it looks so bleak right now. For a while, RFK Jr. was saying some interesting stuff, but he seems a complete sellout on a lot of these issues. And, Dennis Kucinich is no longer his campaign chairman too, which I think kind of strikes a blow for those of us who really hope that, this guy gets elected and goes and shakes things up. I think his daughter-in-law, who's in the CIA is now, or wasn't the CIA, is now running his campaign. So that optimism is kind of gone as well. Of course, the Libertarian candidates, there's some interesting guys out there. I'm still kind of reeling from the whole Dave Smith thing, and what could have been in the blow that might have struck to the worst state. But, I'm hoping one of these guys really, catches fire on the war issue and really starts to, speak in a message that not just get some Mises Caucus libertarians excited, but, in the way I thought Dave would really start to rally normal Americans to be like, you know what? I am tired of these stupid wars, and I'm not sending my child to fight another one, and I'm not voting for any single person who's going to do so. And I'm not feeling that yet, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
And I mean, the best I guess that we could hope for is just that something happens, the American people start feeling differently one day, but I don't see any reason why to be optimistic. Maybe ask me in a week, I'll feel better.
Yeah, Rechtenwald has been great on this as far as being non-interventionist. I really like him, and yeah, I'm as sad as you are. I mean, Dave, this would have been Dave's moment, and he missed out. So we're all doing our best, and I'm glad that you and Scott and Connor and Dave and all the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com. I know it's not full overlap between those two great institutions, but I really enjoy the fact that you guys are doing that great work. I did want to throw a comment up here from Jessica in Colorado. She had that nice to say for you. That's Jessica Finsky, who, good luck. She's running for city council in Arvada, California. Sorry, Arvada, Colorado. And I hope she wins. And we've got, I think, about 12 to 15 Mises Caucus endorsed candidates running. Uh, uh, I guess it's next week is election day, and I think we're going to have at least a couple of victories. Those of you who want to help us out, takehumanaction.com and follow the donate link and all that. But it's going to be the Project Decentralized Revolution thing. It's a long game, and it's working. It's slow and steady progress, and I'm excited about what's going to go on, but there's no magic bullet. We're going to elect a horrible president next year, no matter who wins, and you guys are going to have lots to write about over at antiwar.com and Libertarian Institute, and I'm glad you're going to be a part of that for a while. Everything else going good with you? You're just busy, and you just keep putting it out every day, right?
Yeah, busy. Definitely miss the crew out in Colorado. And if only Jess could run for president in 2024, I had hope. At least she would make the anti-war movement sexy again. But
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I guess she's just going to be running in Colorado and be on a city council in Arvada, which is awesome. By the way, huge congrats to some of the great libertarians in Colorado. Andy and Emily got married this past weekend. That's Andy Bukovic. I'm sure you know him from Facebook or Twitter or something. Yep. And yeah, the Libertarian Institute, we're publishing Tom Woods' forthcoming book. So that's pretty awesome. You held up Sheldon's Richmond's book during the show, Coming to Palestine. That's a Libertarian Institute book. We have a brand new book out on the coming conflict with China by Joseph Solis Mullen. So check that out. Enough Already, Scott's latest book, and we'll also have Provoked, Scott's forthcoming book.
Yeah. When's that coming out?
Oh boy, I can't say. Ask Scott; he'll give you a pretty long answer. We also got books coming out by Keith Knight and a couple books on Syria.
Okay. And I apologize. My main camera and mic crapped out on me about 20 minutes ago, so I probably don't sound as good as I did if I ever sounded good. But I think Liam McCollum is going to interview Joseph Solis Mullen pretty soon for one of the non-live episodes of Decentralized Revolution. So that will be great. And yeah, so all of you guys running, like Jessica, everybody, keep running hard. I want to see some victories next week, and I appreciate you coming on, Kyle. And yeah, just keep doing the great work. And on days when I'm not depressed, I go over and listen to you guys and to get my news, and when I'm strong enough to handle it. So just keep up the good work.
All right, thank you very much, Aaron.
All right, see you, Kyle. Bye bye.
See you.